So, I finally played the Resident Evil 4 Remake. I know, I'm a little late to the party, but let's celebrate that I showed up at all. This happens, though, when you have a backlog of games and you don't have a lot of time to play them. You put off buying new games. This game in particular, though, I put off buying for a couple of additional reasons. Unlike the Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes, I didn't think Resident Evil 4 really needed a remake. It was a pretty solid game and it stood the test of time. The other reason is that I didn't really think they would change what I didn't like about the original game. We'll talk about that more later. Let's get right into it here. If you've never played a Resident Evil game, it's easily described as survival horror using a third-person view. It is a variety of weapons to combat a variety of mutants and monsters. You also are required to perform some easy puzzle solving to progress through the game. The puzzle solving in this game in particular, it's not too hard, and most of them are very obvious. None of them are real showstoppers. The story is simple. You play as Leon Kennedy, survival of Resident Evil 2, and you are tasked with rescuing the kidnapped daughter of the US president. Resident Evil 4 is set in Spain, and when you start the game, you are accompanied by 2 local police officers. Predictably, they live for about 10 minutes, leaving you to complete your mission alone. It's probably for the better, though. Who needs to babysit 2 cops when you already have the president's daughter to worry about? If you have played through the original, a lot of things are the same, but some things have changed. And some things are entirely new. Enemies defeated drop money and gunpowder, which you can use to build ammunition. Item boxes in this game do contain gunpowder, money, as well as ammunition, and they could also find herbs and treasure in. But let's look at some of the things that have changed. Leon still carries a knife as a secondary weapon, but this has changed quite a bit. In fact, the knife plays a real prominent role in this game. First of all, the knife can be used as a secondary weapon to break out of an enemy's hold. It can also be used to parry or deflect an enemy's attack. This means you can genuinely use the knife as a weapon, at least against weaker opponents. But regardless of how the knife is actually used, it does take damage and will eventually break. You can go to the merchant to get this repaired, and you can also upgrade the knife like any other weapons in the game. Obviously, it's an important part of the game, but I don't want to talk about just the knife all day. I found the gameplay in this game a lot faster than the original. Enemies seem to spawn in strategically superior locations, and they seem to move around the environments quite quickly. This really added to the challenge level, especially when you're babysitting Ashley. Speaking of Ashley, she's changed a lot for the better. They've abandoned her schoolgirl looks and gave her a more mature look. You can also have her follow closely or a bit further away, depending on what you're doing at the time and what you're being chased from as far as enemies go. Also, you can still lift her up, give her a boost, so she can get into windows and open doors that Leon couldn't get into on his own. She also still has places in the game where you use her and her alone. The biggest change, though, is that they've gotten rid of her life bar. Ashley no longer has a life bar. When she gets hit, and she gets hit hard, she'll crouch down and basically she'll be incapacitated. If she gets hit again, she'll die and it'll be a game over. This is actually good though, because you can lift her up out of the incapacitated mode, and you don't have to waste herbs on her, you don't have to give her yellow herbs to boost her life, and of course they can't wear down her life over time. This actually can work to your advantage in a lot of areas. For example, when I was in the water room, yes, that room is back again, Ashley was raising the bridge. She got injured and went into her crouch. So I allowed the enemy to pick her up and start walking off with her. When I shot the enemy, he dropped her and she was no longer in her distress mode. Because of this, we were actually able to get through the water room, because that would have been a real pain in the ass, getting through all the way to the end of the water room, the very last part, basically dying and having to start that whole room over again. Because if you remember the original, and you played the original, the water room was a pain in the ass in that. It's a pain in the ass in this. Which brings me to some of the environments. The environments in this game are very reminiscent of the environments in the original. However, they do change things up quite a bit. So the original village is practically the same original village. However, the further you go along, it seems the more that they change things up in the game. So when you get to the castle, a lot of the areas are quite a bit different. And although they remind you of areas that you've been in the original game, they are not the same, and they're not laid out the same. And in fact, I like the layout more in the remake than the original. They do, however, pack the environments full of enemies in some places. This is a bit of a complaint for me, although it does increase the flow of the action and increases the intensity of the action. I also found that they really put these intense locations just as you were starting to feel like you're doing better. In other words, you've got a little bit more ammo than usual. You've got a few more herbs to heal yourself than usual. Then all of a sudden you come to a packed area where you've got to kill a lot of enemies, and by the time you get through it, you're down to 5 handgun shell or 5 handgun ammo and 1 shotgun shell or something. It's actually kind of frustrating when you're playing through the game. But I can actually trade that off just because of the intensity. As for the bosses, the boss fights seem to be very similar to the original. However, they do make better use of the environments that they're in. And this is understandable because basically you have better hardware, you have a better game engine as far as development goes, and it's been 20 years since the original came out, so they should make better use of the environments. Well, when you're fighting the lake monster, for example, the waves that the lake monster actually produces are much larger in this game than the original, and they actually affect your boat more than they did in the original. And, by the way, I do want to say for this fight that they got rid of that stupid part where Leon would be outswimming this giant amphibious mutant monster that there's no way he could outswim in any reality whatsoever. So they got rid of that part, which was good. With the fight with the giant guy with the thing in his back, he, instead of just knocking down the little huts that you can go into, he actually tears them up and he'll throw the hut at you. The village elder, in his second form, will grab a bunch of lumber, flaming lumber, and throw it at Leon. So they use the environments much more to their advantage in this game than they did in the original. Finally, I wanted to mention the thing that I was talking about at the start of the video, and that is the thing that bothered me the most about the original. What bothered me most about the original was the length of the game. It was extremely frustrating for me. The first 3 Resident Evil games you could blow through in 3 hours, 4 hours tops. Even the first time through it would only be maybe 4 hours to get through. And when you got good at it, 2.5 hours, 3 hours tops. Resident Evil Code Veronica was probably about 7 or 8 hours when you got good at it. But that was considered a long Resident Evil game. This one, we're talking 15, 16, 17 hours, probably the first playthrough. The original one frustrated me because of all the cutscenes. I found there were too many cutscenes. They didn't add enough to the story. They could have cut out a lot of the cutscenes and still had the same gameplay, the same story. So when you actually played through it the second, third, fourth time, it got much quicker because you just skipped the cutscenes. This one also has a lot of cutscenes. It has all the familiar areas and all the familiar scenes in it, all the familiar bosses, but it doesn't have, it doesn't seem to take as long to get through. It doesn't seem, even though my file was probably about 16 or 17 hours by the time I was done. Now, that was the first time I played through it, and I was running around a lot, looking for everything I could find. The length of the game in the original really bothered me. I didn't think that they would correct it in this game. They didn't actually correct it in the sense that it took less time but it certainly did. They did correct it from the perspective that it felt like it took a lot less time. It just seemed to flow a lot smoother. It didn't feel like, oh, here we go again, a whole other giant environment for me to complete. In the original, by the time I was done the castle area, I felt like I should have been done the game. I was just so sick and tired of playing the game. I remember telling my brother, I'm just forcing myself through this game just to get through it. But once again, on those second and third playthroughs, hey, not a problem. Skip the cutscenes, it feels a lot better. It had great gameplay, the original. This one has great gameplay as well. I could do without some of the cutscenes in this one as well. The only thing I didn't really talk about during this little review was Separate Ways. Separate Ways in the first one, the original, I really liked. I liked Operation Ada as well, and I liked the Mercenaries for that matter. I haven't actually gotten to those yet. I haven't done any of the additional content yet. I'm gonna get to it, but I just wanted to talk about my thoughts about the original game. So, with all that being considered, I would say that the remake is the superior Resident Evil 4 experience. Now, once again, I didn't think, and I still don't think, that Resident Evil 4, the original, needed a remake. I don't think it was necessary. But here we are, we've got one. And after playing through it, I do feel that it is better. Now, if you've played through this one and want to see what the original is like, go ahead, play through it. It's worth the playthrough. It will feel a little long compared to this one, even though really on the timer, on the clock, it probably isn't. But play through it, see what you think. And if you haven't played this one yet, but have played the original, then this one is worth getting. So give it a try, even if you are skeptical, even if you are like me and say, well, the original doesn't really need a remake. Give it a try. It's worth it. Anyway, I want to thank you all for watching. And if you've gotten to this point in the video, I'm going to ask you to subscribe, especially if you feel like you like this video. I do a lot of different videos and game reviews. Some are 1-minute videos. Some are more lengthy videos, you know. And I have a series called This Game is Great, or What Makes This Game Great. And I look at my favorite games of the past. So give my channel a subscribe, and see you in the next video. Thanks for spending the time with me.